This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Thousands rally in Khartoum protesting military's decision to appoint new ruling council. A new draft agreement at the COP26 climate talks calls for more ambitious plans to limit global warming. Ethiopia slams U.S. sanctions on neighboring Eritrea, asking for them to be canceled. Hello and welcome to Africa Live. As always, great to have you with us. I'm Richard Nta, live in Nairobi. And for those of you joining us from across the continent and around the globe, we thank you for joining us. Let's take a look at other stories making headlines this hour. Libyan conference in Paris pledges support for elections in December. And in sports, Makazola Mapimpi leads South Africa to victory over Scotland. Once again, welcome to Africa Live. Great to have you along with us. Let's talk about what's happening in Sudan. The death toll in the country has risen to 3 as anti-military demonstrations continue. This has been reported by an independent doctors union that also says at least 15 other people have died since protests began in the country following a military takeover 3 weeks ago. Tens of thousands of people took to the streets on Saturday to heed to a call for civil disobedience initiated by pro-democracy supporters. The street marches were carried out in the capital Khartoum and other surrounding cities. The weekend's uproar comes 2 days after Army Chief Abdel Fattah el-Burhan announced the formation of a new ruling council. The body excludes the civilian coalition that had been sharing power with the army since 2019. Naba Moedine has more from Khartoum.
The protest is still going on in different Sudanese states, and Khartoum, of course, is still the security forces are repressing protesters by firing tear gas and live ammunition and chasing some protesters and arresting others. The protest is still going on, and heavy vehicles of military and security deployments and vehicles are blocking the streets of main streets of Khartoum and sensitive location, including the military headquarters and the bridges also. There is 9 due to the Sudanese Medical Committee, which is one of the Sudanese professional association, professional union, said there is 9 people are injured and 1 killed. This is the recent death toll and injuries. The protest is still going on, and the protesters want the military to hand over power and to release the Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok and to reinstate his cabinet. There is still excessive use of violence, despite that a lot of Western countries, including the U.S., have warned against firstly unilateral decisions that the military made, and also against the excessive use of violence. And the protest is still going on, and I think it will last for a couple of days before we see Sudan stable again.
Ethiopia has denounced new U.S. sanctions on its neighboring Eritrea, calling for them to be canceled. These sanctions target Eritrea's military and some individuals and entities. Ethiopia says the real target of sanctions and other tough actions should be Tigray rebels. The U.S. announced the sanctions on Friday over Eritrea's role in the year-long war in northern Ethiopia. Eritrea has also condemned the move as a continuation of Washington's, quote, misguided and hostile policy, close quote. The head of Libya's High Council of State this week is calling supporters to boycott the December 24 vote. The Western-based legislative consultative body says election laws must be amended, and members of parliament in Western Libya are calling for the same. More with CGTN's Adal El-Marhoui.
While world leaders at a recent Paris conference insisted that Libya should begin its democratic elections on December 24, the Western-based High Council of State holds tight to its ultimatum. After meeting with Western politicians, the HCS called for immediate amendments to election laws, which the rival Eastern Parliament unilaterally issued. If their demands are not met, Western politicians say they will boycott the vote.
We all agree that the elections should be postponed until new legislations are issued and we hold parliamentary elections prior to the presidential election. Currently, there is no agreement between us over the current election laws. These laws were not built over the constitutional declaration. What we fear is that the insistence on holding the elections this way could backfire and make Libya fall into another violent episode.
The election laws set the legal framework for the voting schedule and who can run. Currently, they allow almost all Eastern politicians, including Parliament Speaker Aqila Saleh and the commander of the Libyan National Army, Khalifa Haftar, to nominate themselves for president. Both have temporarily stepped aside from their positions 3 months before the vote, as the disputed election legislation dictates. Some Western-affiliated politicians, like interim Prime Minister Abdul Hamid Dbeiba, would be barred from running, as he still holds a government position with just 6 weeks remaining on the vote.
Calls for boycott, if implemented, could lead to a new round of division. It could create a new crisis in Libya. Militias could return to the activities that fueled war. I don't think the international community will allow that. The 20 countries who joined the Paris conference all called to hold the elections on time.
The United Nations support mission in Libya urged the Eastern Parliament to amend the elections laws. Earlier this month, the UN Secretary General's Libya envoy, Jan Kobish, said that, quote, only an inclusive legal framework will pave the way for a credible and inclusive electoral process. World leaders appear to be taking a step back from wide international consensus over holding the presidential and parliamentary elections on December 24. After a Paris conference on Libya, their final statement indicated that what's important is for the electoral process to begin on the specified date, suggesting that both votes do not have to take place on the same day. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
With the Libyan elections hanging in the balance, we've got hold of Professor Gamal Abdel Gawad, former chairman of Al-Aram Center for Strategic and Political Studies, for insights. Let's hear from him.
This is the mindset of the Europeans. They tend to perceive elections to be the panacea, a solution for all kinds of problems. They see trouble in Libya. Yes, definitely Europe and the European and the American policy contributed to the current situation in Libya. They are interested in bringing stability in Libya for many reasons. They have interest in oil, they have interest in limiting illegal migration. But the simple solution they are suggesting elections, thinking that this will solve all problems, I find it quite naive, particularly because Libya had 2 elections before, and actually they made things much more complicated and difficult rather than leading Libya toward a solution to the crisis there. It is no longer a conflict between domestic actors or domestic rival. There is increasing role, increasing influence, increasing military presence of external actors. We see Turks, we see Russians, we see a number of mercenaries coming from different sources, some of them with formal, some of them in an informal capacity. So it's a very complicated situation. With the current level of trust, actually lack of trust between the rivals in Libya, those forces in the east, those on the west, the Muslim Brothers and the liberals, different tribal forces, with the prevalent lack of trust between them, each of them is sticking to the current situation, is relying heavily on the support of external actors, and if there is no real solution, if there is no real compromise, I don't think it will be possible to drive out those external actors from Libya.
Climate financing remains an integral part of averting loss and damage that climate change inflicts on developing nations. Now, these have been some of the final discussions taking place during Glasgow talks as the climate conference wraps up. CGTN's Nawi Jarbakale reports on how high-polluting nations are being tasked with paying other countries to offset their emissions.
Another day, another draft paper, another attempt to find a deal at COP26. This summit was supposed to end on Friday, but it's gone into extra time. For the past 2 weeks, governments from around the world have been meeting here in Glasgow to try and agree a way to limit the future effects of climate change. The president of COP26, UK Minister Alok Sharma, says he hopes countries will rise to the occasion after submitting the latest plans.
The good news is that the fossil fuel text calling for the phase out of coal and fossil fuel subsidies is still there. It's slightly weaker, but it does bring in a just transition, which is incredibly important because we need to support a just transition in the phase out of fossil fuels.
Perhaps the biggest sticking point is funding. Many poorer countries here want more money to protect themselves from future damage. The argument is a simple one. They'll need help as they're likely to suffer more from climate change, even though developed countries have contributed more to man-made emissions. For small island nations like Tuvalu, global warming is a matter of life and death.
Just remember that whatever comes out of Glasgow, Tuvalu will still be sinking, regardless of what effort is achieved here in Glasgow. So there are people, lives and livelihoods being affected as we speak.
In a bid to compromise, the UK has suggested new, tougher rules on climate finance. It calls for a UN committee to meet every 2 years from 2022 to discuss the issue and put pressure on donors. But developing nations remain sceptical, not least because a previous pledge of $100 billion a year by 2020 still hasn't been met. And they also want help for something called loss and damage, or dealing with the impacts of climate change that are being felt right now.
The news continues on Africa Live. We'll see you on the other side of the break with more news stories. Here's what's ahead. France returns 26 items stolen in colonial era. Welcome back to Africa Live. Thanks for staying with us. Uganda has started vaccinating 12 to 18-year-olds with the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine. But even as vaccine supply improves, there is a battle to overcome vaccine hesitancy. Schools in Uganda have been closed for about 2 years, with many students missing out on online classes. Isabel Nakiria reports.
The computer has become the only companion for many Ugandan students who have been out of class for almost 2 years. Solomon Mukisa says if taking the job is the precondition for them to get back to school, then he has no choice.
I wouldn't say eager, because personally I don't have so much trust in it. But if it's what I have to do to go back to school, I'm willing to do it.
The Ugandan government has recommended the Pfizer vaccine for children aged 12 to 18 years. It's also directed that all teachers and students get the jab before school reopens. But uptake is still low.
Maybe not, because I still need to see if the vaccine is safe for everybody to be taking it.
The UN Children's Fund, UNICEF, is concerned that Uganda has kept schools closed for too long despite registering low COVID-19 cases. Parents warn children are falling behind in their education.
Children are tired of sitting home for 2 years. I wish to call upon the teachers, the people who work in schools and other education centers, please take your jobs. We need our children back in school.
Secondary and primary schools reopen in January, while classes for university students have begun. But students without proof of vaccination have been locked out. The Health Ministry says this is to ensure people are safe.
And the reason behind it is for all of us to realize that if we are to protect one another, we need to get vaccinated. Because infection rates among the vaccinated is low.
Uganda has so far administered more than 3.5 million doses of vaccines. The plan now is for the government to vaccinate around 4.8 million people by the end of December as a major condition to reopen the economy and schools. The major task now is to mobilize as many people as possible in order to hit the target. Isabel Nakiria, CGTN Kampala, Uganda.
The United Nations World Food Program warns that it may be forced to cut food rations to women, men, and children in northern Nigeria this month. It says urgent funding is required to continue life-saving operations in crisis-ridden states like Borno, Yobe, and Adamawa states. Humanitarian agencies in Nigeria are calling for the government to do more in providing relief for the victims and ending the country's insurgency. Correspondent Philly Haza reports from Abuja.
Food and relief items shared to members of these internally displaced camps for victims of insurgency in Abuja.
We're very happy about the food and other items delivered to us today, and we pray for peace to reign in Nigeria so we can return to our homes.
But the United Nations World Food Program, which spearheads the distribution of food and relief items in Nigeria, says it requires at least $55 million to keep going. It says more than 500,000 people in the northeast will be directly affected by reduced rations, while about 4.4 million already do not know where their next meal will come from. The pandemic, inflation, insecurity, and limited food supply are affecting food distribution in the region, according to the UN.
About 2 years ago, we started a livelihoods program where we try to, move the IDPs from dependent to becoming self-reliant. But the insecurity came back, so we couldn't do much. We had to go back to, spoon feeding the people. It's never sustainable. It's very expensive. It's unsustainable, just to say the least. So first is to tackle the insecurity. It is chief amongst every other thing.
Also, experts want the government to help build more capacity for local humanitarian agencies so they can support the task of catering for victims of insurgency.
And that's why people like us have consistently and constantly advocated that as it is today, that the national NGOs should be vested with that responsibility because, one, we are on ground and we are Nigerians. We understand the terrain better. Our overhead cost is far, far, far minimal.
Just last month, the government called on all civil society groups and non-governmental organizations across the country to collaborate more in building strong partnerships and capacity for effective response to vulnerable people.
It won't be the first time such a clarion call is made, but it's crucial this time because millions of victims of insurgency risk hunger and starvation. Phil Ihaza, CGTN, Abuja.
Benin has welcomed home 26 artifacts which were looted during French colonial rule more than 130 years ago. The royal artifacts were returned following negotiations between France's President Emmanuel Macron and Benin's President Patrice Talon. CGTN's Deji Badamosi has more on that story.
The very moment the first box containing the artifacts was unloaded. There are 3 trucks in all carrying the boxes containing the 26 royal artifacts. Hundreds have come to the presidential palace to give the artifacts a royal reception. Virtually all the 26 artifacts are said to be royal treasures looted from the Abomey Palace in the ancient kingdom of Dahomey in modern-day southern Benin.
The return of these artifacts represents the return of the greatest values taken out of our land. This is historic. It helps the current generation of our people to see and understand the culture and work of their ancestors and ensure they are maintained.
The return of the artifacts is the outcome of several years of negotiations and mounting calls on former colonial powers to return looted artifacts in museums across Europe.
We will continue this fight because it's important for us, for our development. It's important for Benin, for our future. And I'm sure that in Nigeria, in Togo, in Ivory Coast, in Mali, and so on, I'm sure that people will stand up and will ask for the same thing.
The government says the artifacts will remain in the sealed boxes and kept in a special room for the next 2 to 3 months to allow them acclimatize with the Benin environment before they are then displayed for people to see at different parts of the country.
This item will come back, cannot go only, can go to the museum.
The artifacts can be taken to the museum, but we on our part would have to carry out a purification process. We have to purify the palaces the artifacts were stolen from. Whether the items come back to the palace or not, we have to do rituals to appease the ancestors and to welcome the artifacts because they have a soul of their own.
We have to talk to ancestors.
The artifacts are expected to eventually end up in a museum which is currently being built in Abomey with the assistance of the French government. Deji Bademasi, CGTN, Cotonou, Benin.
And we're not done just yet. We've got your sports segment coming up after the break. Here's what's ahead. Makazole Mapimpi leads South Africa to victory over Scotland.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Canada, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference. How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome into Sport on Africa Live. Let's talk a bit of rugby. Makazole Mapimpi's double helped South Africa outmuscle Scotland 30-15 in the Rugby Autumn Nations Series in Murrayfield, Scotland. Scotland had led 10-8 at the break after a try by Captain Stuart Hogg, but Mapimpi's converted score early in the second period saw the Springboks go 5 points clear. Elton Yankees then extended the lead with two further penalties to lead South Africa well in front at 21-10. Hogg's second try reduced the Springboks' lead to 5 points, but several further penalties with Andre Pollard and Frans Steyn also getting in on the scoreboard helped the South African team record their 7th successive victory over Scotland a week after edging Wales in the Autumn Nations Series. The fate of Kenya's football coach Engin Firat hangs in the balance after the National Football Federation was dissolved and officials sent packing. The Turkish tactician was hired on a 2-month contract by the Football Kenya Federation in September, whose president Nick Wendwa has now been removed from office and arrested for alleged corruption. It is likely that the Turkish coach, who previously coached Moldova, will be in charge of his final match on Monday for Kenya when the Harambee Stars play Rwanda in a dead rubber FIFA World Cup qualifier in Nairobi. And Cristiano Ronaldo, Bruno Fernandes, and their Portugal teammates trained on Saturday as they eye automatic qualification to the World Cup from Group A with a game against Serbia in Lisbon on Sunday. Portugal and Serbia are both tied on 17 points in Group A, but the Portuguese sit on top of the table on goal difference and will secure a spot in Qatar 2022 if they avoid defeat in the pivotal clash. Portugal will be without veteran defender Pepe, but Bernardo Silva should be fit to face the Serbs after taking part in the training session on Saturday. The reverse fixture between Portugal and Serbia played out in March and ended in a 2-2 draw in Belgrade. Australia have declared their readiness for the T20 World Cup against New Zealand in Dubai. Now, in Dubai's cricket stadium, and Captain Aaron Finch will be mindful of the advantage of winning the toss, as so far every team that has batted second under the lights in Dubai has won, with Australia the latest to reap the benefits of choosing to do so after recovering from a 96 for 5 to chase down 177 and beat tournament favorites Pakistan. Matthew Wade got Australia into Sunday's finals against New Zealand with 41 not out from 17 balls, following 3 successive sixes off Pakistan's talismanic left arm quick Shaheen Shah Afridi in an improbable 5-wicket win.
Oh, I think the spirit amongst the team. Obviously, we came here, a lot of people had written us off from the start, so it's been really impressive the way that we've gone about our business. Everyone's prepared really well. Everyone's had a really defining match or match-defining performance at some point. So the guys are really, really up and about for tomorrow.
Well, I guess that'll do it for this edition of Africa Live. Remember, you can send us your feedback to the contacts on the screen and follow us on digital media platforms. For the team, I'm Richard Nta saying thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you at the top of the hour. But up next is Talk Africa. Keep it right here on CGTN.